He ruled Rome's underworld with blood and fear, until one cruel joke changed everything. One night, Lorenzo DeLuca, the ruthless Italian Mafia Boss, invited his shy maid to a grand masquerade, just to humiliate her. But when she walked in, radiant like a goddess, every man froze, and the king of crime forgot how to breathe. From that moment, his empire began to crumble. What started as a joke turned into an obsession, and what began as humiliation became the most forbidden love of his life. But in a world built on betrayal, one woman's beauty can ignite war, and one man's heart can bring down an empire. This is the story of power, guilt, and redemption, of a mafia boss who dared to love the woman he was never meant to touch. Now relax, sit back, and enjoying today's journey. The city of Rome glowed like a spilled treasure chest beneath the night sky. From his penthouse balcony, Lorenzo DeLuca could see it all. The marble domes, the restless river, the endless pulse of a city that bowed to his name. The empire he had built was silent tonight, waiting for his next order. Yet he felt nothing but boredom crawling under his skin. He lifted a glass of aged whiskey, studying his reflection in the window, a man carved from charm and cruelty. Behind him, laughter echoed, his lieutenants drunk on power, trading stories of fear. One of them mentioned the Maid, the quiet girl who kept her eyes lowered and her secrets hidden. The room sneered. Someone joked that even she would look beautiful if invited to his grand masquerade. Lorenzo smirked, a devil's amusement curling his lip. "Then let's invite her," he said, voice smooth as a blade. "Let the little maid see how gods dance." The laughter swelled, cruel and careless. No one expected her to come. It was a jest meant to fill an empty night. Invitations were sent, sealed with gold, one delivered to the servant quarters. When the messenger placed it in her trembling hands, Elena thought it a mistake. She had polished those marble floors for 2 years, never once looked the boss in the eye. Yet the card bore his mark, the serpent crest of DeLuca. All week the city whispered about the masquerade. The richest men of Rome would gather beneath chandeliers worth more than entire streets. Elena watched the preparations from the shadows, dusting the very hall where she was never meant to stand. Each ribbon tied, each glass polished, felt like a reminder of her place. Still, the invitation lay on her table at home, glowing faintly beneath the candlelight, a cruel joke or a door to something else. The night arrived. Cars lined the marble driveway like jewels in motion. Music floated into the air. Violins, laughter, the soft clink of champagne. Lorenzo descended the staircase of his mansion dressed in black silk and arrogance. Masks glittered, faces blurred, power hummed through every step. Yet despite the opulence, he felt an itch of curiosity. Had she dared to come? Hours passed. The ballroom gleamed with laughter and perfume, but the maid did not appear. Lorenzo smirked at his reflection in the wine. "Of course not," he muttered. "Even fools know where they don't belong." His men toasted, mocking the absent girl. Then a hush. The doors opened. The orchestra faltered, then stilled completely. Every head turned. A woman stood framed by golden light from the corridor. Tall, graceful, radiant. The gown clung to her like liquid sunlight, her hair swept into an elegant twist that revealed the proud curve of her neck. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Even the candles seemed to burn more slowly. Lorenzo's glass slipped slightly in his hand. The woman's eyes met his, calm, steady, fearless. He knew that gaze. He had seen it lowered every morning as she poured his coffee. Elena, the maid. The room rippled with disbelief. "Is that her?" someone whispered. Another laughed too loudly, desperate to break the spell. But no one could stop staring. The woman who had once cleaned their messes now stood above them, untouchable, regal. Elena walked forward, every step measured, every breath deliberate. She did not smile. She did not curtsy. She moved through the crowd like someone crossing a bridge she had burned behind her. When she passed Lorenzo, the faint scent of jasmine and resolve brushed his senses. For the first time in years, he had no words. The music resumed, awkwardly, as if the orchestra feared her silence. Conversation stumbled. Men forgot their cigars mid-air. Women watched in envy. Lorenzo's lieutenant leaned close, whispering, "Boss, that's the maid." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The laughter of his earlier jest rang in his ears like a curse. His pulse quickened, not from anger, but something far more dangerous. Fascination. He watched her speak with a guest, saw the soft light catch the gold at her throat, and felt a heat of shame he didn't recognize. Across the room, Elena sensed his gaze. She could almost feel the weight of it pressing against her back, but she kept her chin high, hiding the tremor in her heart. She had come not to beg for acceptance, but to show him, and every soul in this house, that the joke was over. Time blurred. Lorenzo moved through the crowd like a ghost, drawn to her. He heard fragments of compliments thrown her way, saw the jealousy simmer in every look. The men who once ignored her now stumbled over words, and he, the man who owned their fear, could not command his own composure. At last he stood behind her, close enough to hear her breath. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured, voice low, almost pleading. She turned slightly, her eyes calm. "You invited me." It was the gentlest strike he'd ever received. Her words sank deeper than any bullet. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but pride held his tongue. Instead, he offered his hand. "Dance?" She looked at it for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, signore, some things are not meant to be part of your world." And with that, she walked away, leaving the crowd whispering and the music hollow. Lorenzo stood frozen, the weight of his empire suddenly meaningless. Around him, laughter resumed, forced and uneasy. He could feel every eye waiting for his reaction, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Replaying the sound of her voice, the way she had looked at him without fear. The night that began as a joke had become something else entirely. A mirror reflecting every flaw he had hidden behind money and power. The man who ruled Rome's darkness had been disarmed by the light of a woman he had once overlooked. He turned toward the grand staircase, searching for her, but she was gone. Only the faint shimmer of her perfume lingered in the air. The orchestra tried to recover, playing louder, but it only made the silence inside him sharper. He stepped out to the terrace, the city sprawling below, lights trembling in the river's reflection. For the first time in years, Lorenzo DeLuca felt small and utterly human. He set his glass down, staring at the empty ballroom through the glass doors. The laughter inside blurred into noise. Beneath his breath, he whispered to the night, "What have I done?" And behind him, the music stopped again, as if the city itself was listening. The city lights still shimmered beyond the glass, but inside the DeLuca mansion, the air had turned heavy. The orchestra struggled to find rhythm after the silence that followed Elena's exit. Lorenzo stood on the terrace, the faint echo of his own words, "What have I done?" still hanging between him and the night. The laughter behind him returned in cautious waves, servants moving swiftly to erase the awkward hush that had fallen over Rome's most feared man. He straightened his cuffs, trying to slip back into the armor of indifference, yet something inside him refused to obey. Her image lingered, gold and defiance woven into memory. The way she had met his gaze, calm, almost merciful, had undone something pride could not repair. He turned back toward the ballroom, letting the mask of command slide over his face again. Guests approached with forced smiles, offering congratulations for another magnificent affair. Lorenzo nodded without hearing them. His eyes searched the crowd, restless. Unsatisfied until they found the faint trail of movement near the garden doors. The silk of her gown had brushed the air there moments ago. He stepped through the crowd, every step deliberate, his presence parting people like a tide. Whispered gossip followed in his wake. He's going after her. Was it true? The maid? No one humiliates DeLuca and lives to tell it. But none of their voices reached him. All he could hear was the slow drum of his pulse and the ghost of a scent, jasmine and rain, leading him outside. The garden was a pocket of quiet beyond the music, candles flickering between marble statues and dark roses. Elena stood at the edge of the fountain, her reflection trembling on the water's surface. For the first time all evening, she allowed her shoulders to drop, the weight of control slipping away. The night air touched her skin like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Behind her, footsteps, heavy, sure, unmistakable. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't follow me," she said softly, voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Lorenzo stopped a few feet away. "You walked out of my house like you owned it," he said, though the words lacked venom. "And now you're hiding?" "I'm not hiding," she replied. "I'm breathing." The answer hit him harder than any insult. He had never noticed how calm she could sound when she wasn't afraid. Under the moonlight, her eyes were no longer the downcast eyes of a servant. They were clear, unyielding, mirrors showing him the man he had become. He took a step closer, his voice lower. "You made a scene tonight." She turned then, meeting his stare. "No, signore, I just stopped being invisible." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fountain whispered between them. He wanted to tell her that he hadn't meant for it to become cruelty, that the invitation was a thoughtless jest, but even he knew that excuses from men like him meant nothing. "You shouldn't have come," he said again, softer this time. "You shouldn't have laughed." The silence stretched thin. He looked away first. Power had always been his weapon, but in her presence it felt useless. She, who had served his meals and swept his marble halls, now commanded the moment with a calm that terrified him. Inside, the party continued, music, masks, and money swirling together in an empty show. Out here, something real flickered between two broken souls who didn't understand what they were creating. Lorenzo reached for a cigarette, lighting it to hide the shake in his hand. "You think this world will suddenly respect you because you wore gold tonight?" he asked, though even as he said it, his tone betrayed him. "I didn't wear gold for them," she said. "I wore it to remind myself I was never part of their dirt." He exhaled smoke, watching it blur the stars. "You've grown bold." "No," she whispered, turning away again. "Just tired." He took another step forward. The distance between them closed until he could see the faint shimmer of tears she refused to let fall. For reasons he couldn't name, he wanted to touch her face, to see if the cold exterior he had built could melt against warmth, but he didn't. The mafia world had rules, and tenderness was not among them. Behind the hedges, voices rose, men calling his name, laughter thick with alcohol. He straightened, the mask returning. "They're looking for me," he said quietly. "Then go," she replied without turning. "Your world waits." He hesitated, wanting to tell her that his world no longer made sense, but she was already walking away, the golden gown catching the moonlight like a final insult to the darkness he carried. Back inside, eyes followed him as he re-entered the ballroom. His men smirked, mistaking silence for control. One leaned close, whispering, "She won't last long, boss. Women like that never do." Lorenzo didn't answer. He poured himself another drink, staring into the amber swirl as though it could drown thought. Through the glass doors, he could still see the faint outline of her figure disappearing down the garden path. The sound of the violin returned, sad and trembling. Every chord felt like confession. For the first time in years, he couldn't command his own heart. The empire he had built on fear suddenly felt fragile, as if one defiant look from her could tear it down. He hated that she had done this to him. He hated that he couldn't look away. She had walked out into the night unguarded, and yet somehow he was the one stripped bare. The party blurred around him, the laughter of men who mistook cruelty for power, the perfume of women who mistook fear for charm. And over it all, the echo of her calm voice. "I just stopped being invisible." He clenched his fists, forcing his breathing steady. Somewhere in the crowd, eyes watched him, sharp and knowing, but he didn't see them. He saw only the door she had vanished through, the night swallowing her glow. Outside, beneath the marble arches, another figure lingered. Marco Bianchi, rival Dawn and patient predator. He had seen everything. The way DeLuca's expression cracked. The silence that followed the maid's departure. He smiled, slow and poisonous, flicking ash from his cigar. In the shadow of the fountain where her reflection still trembled, Marco whispered to the night, "The king just found his weakness." The night after the masquerade felt different in Rome. The city's pulse throbbed with whispers of what had happened at DeLuca's ball. How the king of crime had frozen at the sight of his own maid. The marble halls that once echoed with power now held silence, heavy and sharp. Lorenzo hadn't slept. His glass of scotch sat untouched beside the window, the first rays of dawn bleeding through the skyline. The music from last night still echoed in his mind, not the orchestra's rhythm, but the rhythm of her steps, Elena's. He remembered the way she had walked past him without fear, her chin raised, her dress like liquid gold flowing behind her. It wasn't arrogance, it was freedom, and that freedom burned deeper than any insult ever could. For years he had commanded respect through fear, yet a single glance from her had stripped him bare. Lorenzo's advisor, Matteo, entered quietly. "You need rest," he said, voice hesitant, as if approaching a wounded predator. Lorenzo didn't respond. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the Tiber shimmered faintly in the morning light. "They're talking, you know," Matteo continued. "The families. They say the boss has found his weakness. The maid." The word stung. Maid. It felt too small to describe the storm she had become. Lorenzo turned slowly, his jaw tight. "She's nothing," he muttered, though the words tasted like a lie. Matteo's silence told him he didn't believe it either. Down in the servants' quarters, the mansion was quieter than ever. Elena's room was empty. The bed was neatly made, her uniform folded at the edge. A single note lay on the dresser, unsigned but scented faintly with jasmine, the same fragrance that had lingered in the ballroom when she passed him. No one knew when she'd left, only that she hadn't been seen since dawn. Outside, the streets of Rome were alive with gossip. Bartenders whispered about the mysterious woman at DeLuca's ball. Dressmakers described her gown in envy. To the public, she was a myth reborn, a Cinderella carved from fire instead of glass. But to Lorenzo, she was a reckoning. He couldn't erase the image of her eyes. They carried something deeper than beauty. Pain, pride, and something unspoken. It wasn't defiance. It was memory. He didn't know her story, yet he could feel it had weight, and it haunted him. That afternoon, while the underworld moved beneath the city like shadows under water, Lorenzo sat in his office surrounded by ledgers, deals, and silence. His mind wasn't on money or rivals. It was on her. "Find her," he ordered finally, his tone low but dangerous. Matteo raised an eyebrow. "Find her or bring her back." Lorenzo's glare was the only answer. As his men dispersed into the city, Elena was already miles away. She walked through narrow cobblestone alleys in Trastevere, her golden gown replaced by a simple coat, her hair tied beneath a scarf. The night had given her wings, but daylight reminded her of the chains she'd once worn. Every step away from DeLuca's mansion felt both liberating and heavy. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind, the last words he'd spoken before vanishing into the same debts that had sold her into servitude. "Survive, Lena, no matter what." She had survived, but at a cost. Every polished floor she scrubbed in that mansion reminded her that dreams can be buried alive. Once she wanted to design gowns like the one she wore last night. Now she stitched them for others, nameless and unseen. Yet last night changed everything. For one evening, she'd been more than her past. She had stood before Rome's most powerful men, and not one of them recognized the girl who once cleaned their floors. Not even Lorenzo, the man who held her fate in his ledger. But Elena knew the danger wasn't over. The Mafia didn't forget humiliation easily. She could feel the city's eyes following her even now. There were rules in the underworld, and one of them was simple. Never make the king bleed in public. She hadn't meant to, but her very existence had cut him. Back at the mansion, Lorenzo's men reported nothing for hours. Each phone call brought silence. Frustration brewed in him like a storm. He slammed his hand on the desk, sending papers flying. Matteo sighed. Boss, maybe it's better she's gone. The families are watching. They smell weakness. Lorenzo's voice was low, dangerous. I don't care what they smell. He stood, his eyes dark. I won't let her disappear. He didn't understand why. He just knew the thought of her out there, alone, vulnerable, twisted something inside him. It wasn't mercy. It was something else. Meanwhile, in a cafe across the city, a man watched Elena through the glass window. He was well-dressed, calm, the kind of man who carried danger in silence. A rival Don, Marco Vitale, the same man who had whispered from the shadows at the ball. His smirk deepened as he watched her sip her coffee, unaware. So this is the Maid, he murmured to himself, the girl who made the lions stumble. He placed a tip on the table and rose, his reflection merging with hers in the glass for a fleeting second. Then he vanished into the crowd. By dusk, Lorenzo's men finally returned, their faces pale. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. Lorenzo turned slowly, eyes sharp. Well? He demanded. Matteo exchanged a glance with one of the men, who stepped forward nervously. Boss, she's gone. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Gone where? The man swallowed. We don't know. But someone else is looking for her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lorenzo's chest tightened. For the first time in years, fear, real fear, flickered in his gaze. Not for himself, for her. Matteo's phone buzzed. A photo appeared, grainy, taken from a distance. Elena walking alone at night. And behind her, a dark figure closing in. The photo burned on Lorenzo's desk like a scar he couldn't erase. The grainy image of Elena walking alone through the streets of Rome with a shadow trailing behind her gnawed at him. Every instinct he had as a mafia boss screamed to let her go, to bury the distraction before it became a weakness. But something colder, deeper, refused. He couldn't stop seeing her, couldn't stop hearing the echo of her voice even though she'd barely spoken. Matteo stood near the window, his tone careful. Boss, it could be anyone following her. Rome is full of eyes. Lorenzo didn't look up. His fingers drummed on the table, slow and dangerous. Find out whose. His voice was low, deliberate, like the hum of a storm building beneath marble skies. Meanwhile, across the river in Trastevere, Elena sat at a small wooden table in her friend Sophia's flat. The walls were lined with sketches and fabric samples, remnants of the dream they'd once shared of owning a boutique. The night was quiet except for the hum of scooters outside and the soft scratch of pencil against paper as Elena tried to sketch the gown she had worn at the ball. Her hand trembled. Every line she drew reminded her of him, of that moment when their eyes had locked across the room and her heart had betrayed her defiance. Sophia returned from the kitchen with tea, her eyes full of concern. You need to leave Rome, she whispered. If he finds you... Elena shook her head. I'm not afraid of him. Her voice was soft, but it wavered. She set the pencil down and stared at her reflection in the window. I just don't want to go back to being invisible. Outside, a black car idled on the street below. A man inside held a phone, his voice calm and clipped. She's here, he murmured. Do I make contact? On the other end, Marco Bianchi smiled faintly. His tone was smooth as silk. No, not yet. She's not ready to trust a devil. Let her think I'm her angel first. Marco was everything Lorenzo wasn't. Polished, deliberate, and cold in ways that made others mistake him for a gentleman. But beneath his charm lay a predator's patience. He had watched Lorenzo's empire from the shadows for years, waiting for the moment the lion turned his back. And that moment had finally come, wrapped in golden fabric and eyes that could undo kings. In his office above Via Condotti, Marco leaned back in his chair and stared at the invitation lying before him. He'd written it himself, every word carefully chosen to wound Lorenzo without firing a single bullet. You deserve better than a man who mocked you. He smiled at the irony. The game had begun. Back at Lorenzo's penthouse, silence was a weapon. The men walked carefully around him, sensing the tension that coiled like wire beneath his calm exterior. Reports came in, rumors that rival dons were circling, emboldened by his distraction. "They think you're weak," Matteo warned. "They think the maid has done what no man could, break you." Lorenzo said nothing. He poured himself another drink, though he didn't touch it. His reflection in the glass looked older, haunted. "Weakness," he muttered. "They don't know what that word means." But even he knew. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about something he couldn't control, something that clawed at the edges of his pride. He wanted to tell himself it was guilt, not longing. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face beneath that chandelier glow, saw the strength in her silence, the defiance that now haunted him. Elena folded her sketchbook and rose, trying to steady her breath. The city outside was alive, but she felt caught between two worlds. The one she'd escaped and the one that still watched her from every shadow. When Sophia left to fetch groceries, a soft knock echoed at the door. Elena froze. She hesitated before opening it. No one was there, then only a small velvet box resting on the step. Inside, a single white rose and a gold-sealed envelope. Her heart pounded. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant. She carried it inside, staring at it as if it were a piece of fate. The seal bore an insignia. 2 crossed daggers beneath a crown. She'd seen it once before on the cufflinks of a guest at one of Lorenzo's dinners. Marco Bianchi. She remembered his cold eyes, the way he'd looked at her even then, assessing, amused, dangerous. Elena hesitated to open it. Was this another joke? Another man testing how far she'd fall before breaking? She wanted to throw it away, to pretend she didn't care. But curiosity and a quiet hunger to be seen made her hands tremble as she broke the seal. The letter inside was written in graceful Italian script, every line soaked with charm and poison alike. You deserve better than a man who mocked you. You deserve to be seen for the woman you are, not the servant they made you. Meet me tomorrow, and let me show you what power feels like, not cruelty. Her chest tightened. Power. The word echoed in her mind. She'd spent her life under it, crushed by it. Could it ever belong to her instead? Sophia returned moments later and noticed the letter in her hands. Who sent that? Elena hid it quickly. No one. But her voice betrayed her. That night she couldn't sleep. The city outside whispered her name through the rain. She stared at the letter again, running her fingers over the words. The temptation wasn't in Marco's offer. It was in the possibility that someone, anyone, might see her differently. Across the city, Lorenzo stood on his balcony, the same rain streaking down his face. He didn't know why his chest hurt, only that something was slipping beyond his control. He clenched the railing, jaw tight, as thunder rolled above the skyline. In another part of Rome, Marco watched the same storm from his window, the glow of his cigar lighting the dark. Tomorrow, he murmured to himself, a smirk curling at his lips. Let's see if the lion comes running when his goddess wanders too close to the wolves. Elena finally exhales, her hand trembling as she unfolds the letter once more. Her eyes locking on the last line. Meet me tomorrow. The camera lingers on her face as thunder rumbles in the distance. And far below her window, a black car waits, its engine quietly humming. The rain hadn't stopped since the letter arrived. It fell like silver threads over the cobblestone streets, soft but relentless. By morning, the storm had thinned to a mist, leaving Rome washed clean, or pretending to be. Elena stood by the window of Sophia's flat, staring down at the city still dripping with night's memory. The letter lay on the table behind her, its words burned into her mind. Meet me tomorrow. Tomorrow was now. She told herself she wouldn't go. She whispered it again and again like a prayer, but her reflection in the window said otherwise. Curiosity has a cruel way of sounding like courage when the heart is tired. Sophia tried to stop her. Lena, you don't owe anyone anything. Don't let them pull you back into their world. But Elena only smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from exhaustion, not confidence. Maybe I just need to know what he wants, she said quietly. Then I'll disappear for good. By noon, the sky turned pale, and a black car glided to a stop near a small cafe tucked between flower stalls in Trastevere. Marco Bianchi stepped out, every inch of him sculpted in confidence. Tailored suit, slick hair, smile sharp enough to cut glass. He greeted the waiter by name, left a tip before sitting, and waited as if he owned the world. Elena arrived moments later, wrapped in a beige coat, her hair still damp from the rain. Her eyes darted once around the cafe, not out of fear, but habit. The instinct of someone who had learned to survive by watching shadows move. Marco rose smoothly, his charm immediate. Signorina Elena, he greeted, voice like velvet dipped in danger. I was beginning to think angels didn't keep appointments. She hesitated before sitting. You shouldn't have sent that letter. He smiled, unbothered. Ah, but I had to. A woman like you doesn't belong among servants. I saw you that night. The way they looked at you. Especially him. Her chest tightened. Lorenzo? She said his name carefully, like a wound reopening. Marco nodded slowly, his gaze searching her face. You have no idea the effect you had on him. Rome's most feared man, undone by his own maid. It was beautiful. Cruel, she corrected softly. It was cruel. He tilted his head. Cruelty is a language men like DeLuca understand. You've lived under it long enough. Let me teach you another. One where you have power. Elena looked away. Power? You think I want to be like him? No, Marco said gently. I think you want to be free of him. The words hit her harder than she expected. Freedom. It sounded like sunlight after years underground. But in his tone, it also carried a price. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I can protect you. Give you everything he never did. Wealth, safety, a name that commands respect. All I ask in return, his smile widened slightly, is that you let me make him regret ever laughing at you. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, the temptation shimmered. To let someone else fight her battle, to see Lorenzo suffer as she once had. But something deep inside resisted. She thought of the look in Lorenzo's eyes at the ball. Not mockery, not power. Something else. Guilt. She rose slightly, unsure of what to say, when Marco reached for her hand. Elena, he said, softer now, the charm giving way to something that almost sounded sincere. Don't confuse forgiveness with peace. Sometimes peace only comes after you burn what hurt you. She didn't pull her hand away. Not yet, because for a fleeting second, part of her believed him. Across the city, in Lorenzo's penthouse, chaos simmered beneath marble silence. His phone vibrated on the desk, a coded message flashing from one of his men. Matteo read it aloud. Bianchi met her, cafe on Via della Scala. The air shifted instantly. Lorenzo's glass shattered against the floor. Get the car, he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Matteo hesitated. Boss, this could be a trap. I don't care. He was already halfway out the door. As the car roared through the streets, rain returned, streaking across the windshield in furious lines. Lorenzo's hands gripped the steering wheel like he was holding back an explosion. Matteo sat beside him in silence, knowing better than to speak. Every streetlight they passed reflected fragments of his fury. A man torn between vengeance and something deeper he didn't dare name. At the cafe, Marco's charm deepened. He poured her tea, spoke of Milan, of dreams lost and found, of how talent like hers shouldn't fade into the dust of servitude. "Design again," he urged. "I'll open you a studio tomorrow if you say the word." Elena's breath caught. For a moment she imagined it. The life she once wanted, colors and fabric and light. But then she saw the shadow behind his smile. Marco wasn't offering freedom, he was offering a cage made of gold. Her eyes flickered to the window, the sky darkening again with the weight of another storm. "You talk like I'm something you can buy," she whispered. Marco's smile faltered for the first time. "No, Elena," he said smoothly. "I talk like a man who knows your worth. That's something Lorenzo never did." Her lips parted to reply, but before she could, the sharp screech of tires tore through the street. Heads turned. Outside the cafe, a black Maserati skidded to a halt, splashing water across the sidewalk. Elena's breath hitched. Marco's eyes narrowed, knowing immediately who it was. Through the rain-streaked window, Lorenzo DeLuca stepped out, dark suit, jaw set, storm in his eyes. For a moment, the cafe went silent, the air itself holding its breath. Marco looked back at Elena, a smirk curling at his lips as he slowly lifted her hand toward his mouth. "Careful," he whispered, eyes glinting. "Looks like your master came to collect his ghost." As Marco's lips brushed the back of Elena's hand, the cafe door burst open with a violent swing, and Lorenzo's shadow fell across the room. The teacups rattled, every head turned, and for the first time, two kings stood face to face, with one frightened goddess caught between them. The tires screamed against the cobblestone street as Lorenzo's black Maserati came to a furious stop. The cafe windows trembled under the echo. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Every head turned, first toward the car, then toward the man who stepped out of it like a storm breaking through calm skies. Lorenzo's eyes were two shards of molten rage. His suit, perfectly cut, couldn't hide the feral energy in his movements. He didn't walk toward them. He hunted. Marco didn't flinch. He rose from his seat with a smirk curling the edge of his lips, his hand still gently around Elena's. The gesture was deliberate, a taunt. The world seemed to narrow between the two men. One, a devil in silk, the other, a storm in human form. Elena's breath caught. The tension was unbearable. Her heart thudded in her chest as she whispered, "Lorenzo, please, don't." But Lorenzo's glare silenced her. "Get your hands off her," he growled, his voice a low thunder that vibrated through the cafe's glass. Marco tilted his head, amused. "Is that an order or a plea, old friend?" The word friend was venom. It made Lorenzo's jaw tighten until the muscle ticked. They hadn't been friends in years, not since the night their partnership had ended in blood and betrayal. Now, standing across from each other again, the air between them carried the weight of unfinished business. Elena tried to step back, but Marco's grip tightened. "You mock her." "Then chase her like a possession," Marco said coldly. "Maybe she's realizing she deserves better than a king who treats her like a pawn." Lorenzo's hand flexed, veins bulging under his sleeve. "You think you can protect her from me?" Marco smirked. "No, I think I can protect her from herself, from falling for men like you." The words sliced deeper than either of them expected. Elena's eyes widened. The shame and fury in Lorenzo's face were unmistakable. The cafe was silent except for the faint hum of tension and the trembling rhythm of her heartbeat. Without warning, Lorenzo crossed the distance between them and gripped Marco's collar, dragging him half over the table. Dishes shattered, coffee spilled. "You stay away from her," he snarled. "She's not part of this world." Marco laughed, soft, cruel, calculated. Then why is she standing here wearing the fire you lit in her? Lorenzo's fist came up, but Elena's trembling voice stopped him. Enough! Her tone cracked, breaking the air like glass. Both men froze. She looked between them, her face pale but fierce. I'm not a trophy to fight over. You don't own me, either of you. Marco stepped back, straightening his jacket, his eyes glinting with respect. You see, Lorenzo? She's stronger than you thought. Lorenzo's breath came hard. He didn't answer. His eyes shifted to Elena, pleading, conflicted, furious. He wanted to drag her away, to hide her from this world, from men like Marco, from himself. But for the first time, he realized she wasn't the same woman who once cleaned his floors. Elena turned to Marco, her voice softer now. You offered me protection. But tell me, Marco, what would it cost me? He smiled, knowing charm was his deadliest weapon. Only your trust. And if I refuse, his expression hardened, then don't be surprised if the next time he comes for you, it's not for love, but for silence. Lorenzo lunged again, but this time Elena stepped between them, her eyes glistening with restrained tears. I said, stop, she cried. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. I've lived as a shadow long enough. I won't be another war trophy between two devils. The entire cafe was dead silent. Marco's men at the corner shifted, hands grazing their weapons. Lorenzo's bodyguards appeared at the door, ready for blood. But neither boss moved. Finally, Marco sighed, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. Fine, he said smoothly. But remember, Elena, when kings fight, queens are the first to fall. He brushed past Lorenzo, his smirk lingering like poison in the air. Outside, his car door slammed, and the roar of his engine faded into the distance. Inside, Lorenzo stood motionless, staring at Elena. His voice, when it came, was low, stripped of pride. Why did you meet him? Because you broke me, she whispered, and I needed to remember what freedom felt like. Lorenzo's breath hitched, but his pride forced silence. He turned away for a moment, running a hand through his hair. The mighty Dawn, feared by empires, now stood disarmed by the woman he once underestimated. She picked up her coat and walked past him, every step soft but defiant. Don't follow me, she said. He didn't move, not yet. He only watched as she disappeared into the street's light, her silhouette fading into Rome's evening haze. Then slowly his voice broke through the quiet, dark, and vengeful. Find Marco, he ordered his men. I want his every move watched. Boss, one of them hesitated. What about the girl? Lorenzo looked out the window where Elena had vanished, his jaw tightening. She's already in the middle of this, he muttered, and she doesn't even know it yet. Outside, the city buzzed as if nothing had happened, but something had shifted. Lines had been drawn. As Lorenzo's car pulled away, a man in a gray coat stepped from the alley, Marco's spy. He dialed a number and whispered, She's the key. Marco says, take her tonight. The night air in Rome felt different, heavy, still, almost watching. Elena walked down the narrow street, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. Her coat pulled tight against the creeping chill. The city lights shimmered in puddles from an earlier rain, casting ghostly reflections that danced beneath her feet. She didn't know she was being followed. Every few steps she felt a faint shiver crawl up her spine, that strange sense of being seen. She quickened her pace, trying to convince herself it was nothing, just nerves after the chaos of the cafe. But when a black van turned slowly around the corner behind her, headlights off, instinct whispered the truth. She ducked into a smaller street, her heart hammering, her breath puffed white in the cool air as she pulled out her phone. No signal. The old buildings around her swallowed every sound. Then came the footsteps, heavy, measured, closing in. Who's there? She called out, her voice trembling but steady enough to echo. No answer, only the crunch of boots behind her. She started running. Her heels slipped, the world blurring in panic as she turned a sharp corner, only to collide with a figure in a gray coat. Strong arms caught her before she fell. Shh! A man's voice whispered close to her ear, the smell of smoke and leather mixing with the cold air. Don't scream! Elena shoved him away, eyes wide. Who are you? He smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Signorina. Orders. Before she could react, two men emerged from the shadows. A rough hand clamped over her mouth, another grabbed her wrists. She fought wildly, kicking, twisting, her muffled cries echoing down the deserted alley. The man in the gray coat nodded once. Take her. They shoved her into the van, doors slamming shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. Inside, the engine roared to life, and the van sped through the narrow streets. Elena's hands were bound, her body shaking with fear and fury. Let me go, she shouted, but her voice was drowned by the roar of the motor. The man beside her glanced down, indifferent, scrolling through his phone. When the van jolted over a bump, she caught sight of a tattoo on the driver's wrist, a serpent circling a dagger. Her heart dropped. Marco's men. Tears burned her eyes, but anger burned hotter. She pulled against the ropes until they cut her skin. She refused to be a victim again. Marco's making a mistake, she hissed through clenched teeth. If Lorenzo finds out... The man beside her chuckled. He already knows, he said. That's the point. The van came to a stop at the edge of the Tiber River, near an old warehouse where rusted metal doors loomed like a mouth, waiting to swallow her. They dragged her out, ignoring her struggle, and pushed her inside. The scent of oil and damp iron filled the air. A single light flickered from the ceiling, casting long shadows. Then came the sound of slow clapping. Marco stepped forward, dressed in black, his tie undone, his expression calm but sharp as a blade. Elena, he said softly, his voice smooth as velvet. You shouldn't have walked away. She glared at him, defiant despite the fear clawing at her chest. You call this protection? He smiled faintly, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. No, I call this persuasion. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You have no idea what power you hold, do you? The great Lorenzo DeLuca is losing sleep over you. You're not just a woman to him. You're his undoing. Her stomach twisted. You're using me. Of course, he said without shame. Everyone uses someone in this world, Elena. I just admit it. She spat at his feet. You're disgusting. Marco's expression hardened, the charm fading for a moment. Careful, he warned, voice cold. I'm not the one who made you a maid in a house of wolves. I'm giving you a chance to rise above them. She met his gaze, trembling but steady. Then kill me, she said quietly, because I'd rather die than be your pawn. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Marco laughed softly, shaking his head. No, Bella, death is too easy. You'll stay alive, long enough to make Lorenzo suffer. He motioned to his men. Keep her here. No harm. Yet. They dragged her to a small side room with a barred window. The door slammed shut, the lock echoing like a sentence. Alone in the dim light, Elena sat against the cold wall, her wrists raw, her heart breaking, not from fear, but from betrayal. She had tried to escape this world, and it had found her again. Outside, Marco stood by the window, lighting a cigarette. His right-hand man approached. Boss, what's the plan? Marco exhaled a stream of smoke, eyes glinting. We wait. He'll come for her, and when he does, Rome will bleed. Meanwhile, across the city, Lorenzo's phone buzzed on his desk. One message, one image. Elena, bound in Marco's warehouse. His hand tightened around the phone until the glass cracked. His heart turned cold as steel. He rose slowly, eyes burning with purpose. Get the car, he ordered, his voice deadly calm. Boss, it's a trap, his advisor warned. Lorenzo's lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "I know." He slipped his gun into his jacket, his tone chilling. "That's why I'm going." As the car sped toward the river, Marco's men watched from the rooftops, guns ready. In the warehouse, Elena heard the faint growl of an approaching engine and whispered to herself, trembling, "Please, Lorenzo, don't die for me." The night fell silent before chaos. Lorenzo's black convoy sliced through the wet streets of Rome like shadows born from vengeance. Inside the lead car, he sat in absolute stillness, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the dim road ahead. The glow of the city lights flickered across his face, revealing not just rage, but guilt. Every second that passed without her voice, without her safety, burned him alive from the inside. 5 minutes to the summit, his driver whispered. Lorenzo nodded once, loading his pistol with mechanical precision. His men exchanged uneasy glances. They'd seen him angry before, but never like this. This was something different, something personal. At the abandoned summit hall overlooking the city, Marco stood before a group of rival dons, his expression carved with smug satisfaction. He poured himself a drink, swirling the glass lazily as Elena stood beside him, bound but defiant. The gold lights above them flickered, casting shifting shadows on her pale face. "Gentlemen," Marco began smoothly, raising his glass, "you see before you the weakness of a king, the mighty Lorenzo DeLuca, ruler of Rome's underworld, destroyed by the very maid he thought beneath him." His words rippled through the room like poison. The dons laughed, low and cruel. Elena lifted her chin despite the rope cutting her wrists. "You think humiliating me makes you powerful," she spat. "You're no better than the man you hate." Marco's smile faded for a moment. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No, my dear, I'm worse, and I'm proud of it." Outside, tires screeched. Headlights cut through the fog, slicing the darkness like knives. One of Marco's guards ran in. "Boss, he's here!" Marco's smirk returned. "Let him in!" The heavy doors burst open before he could even finish the sentence. Smoke grenades rolled across the marble floor, exploding into thick gray clouds. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Men shouted, bullets ricocheted off pillars, and the grand hall descended into chaos. Elena ducked behind a curtain as glass shattered. Her heart pounded so violently she could barely breathe. Through the haze, a familiar figure moved with lethal grace. Lorenzo. His eyes searched desperately, ignoring the bullets whizzing past. He was bleeding already, a deep cut across his cheek, but he didn't stop. Marco drew his gun, shouting, "Kill him!" But it was too late. Lorenzo's men flooded the hall, black suits and rifles in synchronized fury. The dons scattered, diving for cover as the old chandeliers swung wildly overhead. Lorenzo moved like a storm, cold, precise, unstoppable. He took down one guard, then another, each shot echoing like judgment. But his eyes were fixed only on one thing, the golden glimmer of Elena's gown behind the curtain. He reached her, his hand trembling as he pulled the fabric aside. She turned, tears streaming down her face, disbelief flooding her voice. "You came." He dropped his gun and stepped forward. "Of course I came." She fell into his arms, the world around them dissolving in smoke and screams. For a moment they stood there, the air thick with gunpowder and emotion. His hand found her cheek, brushing away the dirt and tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice raw. "You never deserved any of this. Not the cruelty, not the pain, not me." Her breath caught, words lost between fear and forgiveness. "Then prove it," she whispered. Lorenzo nodded once, gripping her hand. "We're leaving now." They ran toward the side exit, bullets tearing through the walls. Marco's voice boomed behind them. "You think you can steal her from me, DeLuca?" Lorenzo turned mid-run, eyes burning. "She was never yours." He fired once. The bullet grazed Marco's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Elena stumbled as they reached the corridor. The floor was slick with rain from the shattered skylight above. Lorenzo pushed her forward, shielding her with his body as another wave of gunfire erupted behind them. "Keep moving," he shouted, gripping her wrist tightly. They crashed through a metal door into the night air. The sound of distant sirens mixed with the thunder of their hearts. But as they reached the open courtyard, Lorenzo's instincts screamed danger. He turned, too late. A single gunshot echoed through the darkness. Elena froze. For a second, the world stopped moving. Lorenzo stood still, confusion flickering in his eyes. Then his body staggered. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. His knees buckled. "Lorenzo!" Her voice cracked, horror slicing through every syllable. She caught him as he fell, her trembling hands pressing against the warm blood spreading across his shirt. "No, no, no," she whispered frantically. "Stay with me." He looked up at her, a faint pained smile touching his lips. You look like that night again. The golden gown." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she cradled his head in her lap. The rain began to fall, washing the blood into the stone beneath them. Around them, gunfire dimmed into distant echoes. "Don't talk," she begged, shaking her head. "You're going to be okay. You have to be." He tried to speak again, but his breath came shallow. His fingers brushed her face, then fell limp. As Elena screamed his name, another shadow emerged from the smoke. Marco, bleeding but grinning through the pain. He pointed his gun at her and said coldly, "Now let's see how strong you really are without your savior." The world spun in noise and smoke, but all Elena could hear was the uneven rhythm of Lorenzo's breathing. Gunfire echoed distantly, the storm above roaring like the city itself had gone mad. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the wound on his chest, blood seeping through her palms, warm and endless. "Stay with me, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare die on me now." Lorenzo's eyes fluttered open, pale and dazed beneath the flickering streetlight. The storm drenched them both, rain washing crimson streaks down his shirt. He tried to speak, but his throat caught on pain. Still, a faint smile touched his lips. A rare, fragile smile that didn't belong to a mafia boss, but to a man stripped bare of power. "You changed me, Elena," he rasped, the words trembling between breaths. "Maybe that's why fate punished me." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his. "Then let fate take me too," she whispered fiercely, "because I'm not leaving you." The night howled around them, sirens approaching, footsteps closing in. Somewhere nearby, Marco was shouting orders, his voice faint through the chaos. Elena looked around frantically, spotting a narrow passage between two crumbling walls. With every ounce of strength, she dragged Lorenzo through the mud and debris, her clothes torn, her heart pounding in terror and determination. He groaned in pain, eyes half-lidded, his hand gripping hers weakly. "Elena, stop," he murmured. "You'll get killed." She shook her head, wiping blood from her face. "You saved me, Lorenzo. Let me return it." They stumbled into an abandoned garage lit by the dull glow of a flickering bulb. The smell of gasoline and rust filled the air. She found an old tarp, tore it into strips, and pressed it against his wound, her hands trembling so violently she could barely tie the knot. He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek. Why are you crying?" "Because I can't lose you," she said softly, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Because you're not the monster I thought you were." He tried to chuckle but winced instead. Don't make me out to be something good, Elena. You've seen what I am." She met his fading eyes, fire behind her tears. "I've seen what's left of you when the power is gone. That's who you are now." Outside, engines roared. Sirens, tires, chaos growing nearer. She turned toward the sound, panic rising in her chest. The police, or worse, Marco's reinforcements. She didn't know who to fear more. Lorenzo's voice was weak, but steady. If they find you here, they'll kill you too. She wiped his face with her sleeve, her touch gentle, trembling. Then we'll die together. He caught her wrist, his grip faint but firm. No, he whispered, you'll live. You'll design your dresses again. Remember Milan? The words hit her like a ghost from a forgotten dream. How do you... He smiled faintly. I read your file the day you started working in my house. His breath hitched. Didn't know I'd end up falling for the girl I tried to forget. Her lips parted, the weight of his confession cutting through the noise. She stared at him, heart breaking, heart healing, all at once. You fell for me? He exhaled a shallow breath that almost sounded like laughter. It's funny, isn't it? The maid I invited as a joke turned into the only thing real in my world. Elena's tears fell faster now, mingling with the rain that streamed through the broken roof above. Then don't you dare leave me, she whispered, pressing her hand over his heart. You hear me? Don't... He coughed, blood staining his lips. Eyes fluttering. Elena, promise me something. Anything. If I make it out, I'll leave this life. I'll walk away. But if I don't... His hand slipped from hers, falling to the ground. You run, and you never look back. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, unable to speak. The door burst open, light flooding the dark space. Police! Voices shouted. Officers swarmed in, their boots splashing through puddles, guns raised. Elena lifted her hands instinctively. Help him! She cried. He's losing blood! 2 paramedics rushed forward, kneeling beside Lorenzo. One pressed a mask over his mouth, while the other checked his pulse. We've got a faint heartbeat. Move now! They hoisted him onto a stretcher, the wheels squealing as they pushed him toward the waiting ambulance. Elena stumbled after them, her vision blurry through tears. Please, she begged, grabbing one medic's arm. Please tell me he's going to live. We'll do what we can, the man said, his tone urgent, professional but empty of comfort. Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the wet streets. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, the city catching its breath after the chaos. Elena stood on the curb, drenched, shaking, watching as they loaded Lorenzo into the back of the ambulance. For a brief second, their eyes met again, his weak, hers desperate. His lips moved, forming silent words she couldn't hear. Then the doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed as the ambulance pulled away. Elena tried to follow, her legs barely moving, but a police officer stepped in front of her. Miss, you need medical attention too. I'm fine, she said breathlessly. Ma'am, you're in shock, he insisted. Sit down. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the receding lights of the ambulance. The sound of the sirens grew fainter, swallowed by the rain. And then... silence. She turned around to look for the other officers, for the paramedics, for any sign of the vehicle that had taken him. Her gaze swept the street once, twice. Her breath caught. The ambulance was gone, completely gone. No flashing lights, no sound, no trace of wheels on the wet pavement. Elena's heart stopped. No, she whispered, spinning in circles, her voice rising in panic. Where is he? The officers exchanged confused glances, checking their radios. We didn't call for any ambulance yet, one of them muttered. Her knees buckled, her hands flying to her mouth. What do you mean? He frowned, scanning the empty road. Whoever took that man, it wasn't us. As lightning flashed across the Roman skyline, Elena stood alone in the rain, realizing the truth. Lorenzo hadn't been rescued. He'd been taken. And somewhere in the darkness, a new enemy was moving in silence. The sound of sirens still echoed in Elena's ears. Blue and red lights danced across the broken marble walls as chaos raged around her. She spun in panic, searching through the smoke and the blood, her heart clawing at her chest. "Where is he?" she screamed, pushing past medics and wounded men. But Lorenzo's stretcher, his body, was nowhere to be seen. Only the dark stain of blood on the floor remained, glistening under the emergency lights like a cruel memory. Her legs trembled as she staggered outside, calling his name into the night. But there was only wind and the faint hum of helicopters circling above the ruined mansion. Lorenzo DeLuca, the feared mafia boss of Rome, had vanished into the darkness like a ghost, and in that moment Elena felt something inside her break completely. Days turned into a blur. The police questioned her relentlessly, but she said nothing. To them, Lorenzo was a monster. To her, he was a man who had finally tried to become human. The papers wrote stories. Mafia king presumed dead in summit shootout. Some said he'd been killed. Others whispered that his men had rescued him before the cops could. Elena didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that the man who once ruled Rome had disappeared from the world, leaving behind silence and the faint echo of an unfinished apology. Weeks later, the wounds on her hands had healed, but her heart still throbbed with memories. She found work in a small dress shop near Florence, quiet, distant, far from the city that had scarred her. Each morning she opened the shop early, stitched fabric under the gentle light of dawn, and tried to forget the way his eyes had looked in that final moment, soft, broken, human. But forgetting Lorenzo DeLuca was like trying to erase a storm from the sea. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring out the window, half expecting a black car to roll by or a shadow to appear across the street. Sometimes she'd dream of him, his voice low and unsteady, saying, "You changed me." And she'd wake up crying, unsure if it was grief or something deeper. One evening, the sun dipped low behind the Tuscan hills, painting the sky in gold. Elena was locking up the shop when she noticed a bouquet lying by the door. White lilies tied with a black silk ribbon. Her heart stilled. She bent down and found a note tucked beneath the flowers, written in familiar, sharp handwriting. "The dead don't always stay buried. L." Her breath hitched. She looked around, but the street was empty. Her hands trembled as she clutched the note, tears spilling before she could stop them. It couldn't be real. Yet the faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, dark, intoxicating, unforgettable. She pressed the note to her chest and whispered his name as the world seemed to pause around her. That night she couldn't sleep. The stars felt alive, whispering secrets across the sky. Part of her feared hope. It was too fragile, too cruel. But another part refused to let go. She followed the clue on the back of the note, an address on the outskirts of Florence. It was written in his old code, the one he used when he didn't trust anyone else. The next morning, she followed the trail. The place was quiet, an abandoned vineyard overlooking the valley. Wild vines crept up the old stone walls, and the breeze carried the scent of lemons and earth. She hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding like thunder. Then she pushed it open, and there he was. Lorenzo stood beneath an olive tree, his arm in a sling, a faint scar tracing his jaw. The world seemed to blur around him. He wasn't the untouchable mafia king anymore. His eyes no longer burned with arrogance or control. They were soft now, human, haunted but alive. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elena took a step forward, her voice trembling. "You were supposed to be dead." A faint smile curved his lips. "I was, but then I remembered. I owed someone an apology." Tears slipped down her face as she moved closer, every memory flooding back. Why disappear? Why not come back? He looked down, the wind stirring his dark hair. "Because I wanted to become someone who deserved to be found." That broke her completely. She closed the distance and placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Steady, strong, real. For a moment, all the pain, the betrayal, the fear, everything that had defined them, seemed to dissolve. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I can't undo what I did," he whispered. but I can choose what I become from this moment on." Elena smiled through her tears. "Then start with this moment," she said softly. "Start with me." The vineyard was silent except for the wind brushing through the vines. Lorenzo lifted her hand to his lips, and the world seemed to still. There was no mansion, no crown of blood, no empire, only two broken souls choosing peace over power. Later, as the sun rose behind the hills, its light touched the vineyard like a blessing. The shadows that had haunted them both began to fade. For the first time in years, Lorenzo DeLuca wasn't a boss or a sinner or a man running from death. He was simply Lorenzo, the man who found redemption in the eyes of the woman he once tried to break. And Elena, standing beside him, finally felt free, not because she escaped her past, but because she forgave it. As they walked down the path hand in hand, the city of Florence shimmered in the distance, alive and golden. The world didn't know that its most feared man had chosen love over vengeance. It didn't need to. Some stories weren't meant for headlines, they were meant for hearts. The empire of fear was gone. Only love remained. As dawn broke over the vineyard, Lorenzo whispered, "You saved me, Elena." She smiled softly. "No, Lorenzo, we saved each other." And the sun finally rose on their new beginning.